Welcome to the Infuse Compassion podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quisenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world.
Welcome, Compassionators, to another episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. This is episode 3. And if you haven't listened to episode 2, you need to do that. In episode 2, we had a fabulous conversation with Michelle Choate. And we talked about such a huge range of subjects. We wanted to come back on and give a little more perspective on those and just talk about some of those topics a little bit more. But we talked a lot about self-compassion in there, and really even about how Michelle defines compassion. I loved what she said, that she defined compassion as seeing people suffering and being willing to respond to it. And we talked about how that connects into our own compassion. She made some just golden nugget comments like self-awareness is the first step in compassion toward others. That it starts with us. And then increasing our self-compassion actually allows us to have compassion for others. There were a couple of ideas, Amy, that I know really struck home with you too. One of them around being the CEO of your own life. And there was another one where she talked about emotions and how emotions are really just good data for us. So Amy, jump in and share some of your high-level perspectives on what Michelle talked about. And then let's dig in a little more on some of those topics.
Yeah, I really struggled to be present in it because I was so self-reflective in her storytelling and in her sharing, thinking, oh my gosh, I need these tools. I want to learn more. This is literally, she's giving me the key to walk through the door that I want for the rest of my life. Like that CEO of your own life, of your body, and these insights. Being a big data person, when she said emotions are data, I shot through the roof. I said, oh, I've never looked at it this way. But the reality is when we break it all down, there are warning signs that our body is showing us, that are coming through our mind physiologically, how we're responding. This is data. And if we're a CEO of an organization or a leader of a department, we're going to use the intel, the data that we're getting from our HR systems, our CRMs, whatever it is. We're going to use that data to strategize, to build out a plan, to get our innovation and productivity and retention and engagement up. Well, that's the same thing with what's going on with us. If we can just be aware, like you said, foundationally, be aware and present of what's going on and not in a judgmental state.
I was going to jump on that too, Amy, that judgmental state, because we typically, when we feel strong emotions, especially if they're negative emotions, if they're anger or frustration or disappointment, we tend to be a little judgmental of ourselves. Oh, why am I feeling like that? I must be a bad person. And we turn it into a self-flagellation moment rather than a moment where we can stop and say, okay, why am I feeling that? That is data that my brain and my body are getting, that there's something off. And sometimes it's data that says there's something off in other areas of my life that are leading me to react this way in this area of my life. Sometimes it's data that says my self-talk is off. Because a lot of times it's our self-talk that leads to those emotions that we're feeling. And I love the point that Michelle made, that when we recognize it as data, we're back in control of it.
Mm.
The emotions aren't controlling us. We're back in control of those because we're seeing them as data and learning from that. Now, again, I
Mhm.
just want to reemphasize for our compassionators here that are listening, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't, because you're going to want to hear Michelle's perspective on that and how she laid all that out.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it was really it was so powerful how she came in and just got to the heart of us as human beings. One of the questions that I asked her was about the suffering that you mentioned in the start, right? For us to be able to be in the presence of suffering, witness, be near somebody. And I said, one of the things that I struggle with, and I know I'm not the only one out there, is being in the presence of either your own suffering or witnessing somebody else's. And what do you do when you don't know what to do? And because my thing is sometimes I'll shut down because
Yeah.
I don't know what to do and I don't know what to say. And do you remember what she said in response to that?
Yeah, I do. Do you remember? Because I might not be remembering as clearly as you do. But here's how I remember it, and then I'll let you respond to it
Yeah.
too. What stands out to me is that she said that's a symbol of some fear reaction that we're having.
Mm.
It's part of that fight or flight response. And so we have to ask ourselves, what am I trying to protect myself from by not responding to that suffering? Did I get that close?
That's exactly what she said. And that's the awareness and that's the data.
Yeah.
And so much of the time, when we're feeling fear, when we're feeling angry, we can retreat, we can shut down. Whereas instead, if we are present and look inward and get curious, again, not judgmental, but get curious, what's going on here? There's a story for us to uncover. Be our own reporter, right?
Well, and our own investigator too.
That's what I
And I
meant.
think that's
I meant
but I think that's what you mean
investigative
by
reporter.
reporter. Yeah. Well, because what does a reporter do? They
Yeah.
dig out the facts and then they say, what do these facts mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
Mm-hmm.
reporter's a fair analogy on it too. But I love a phrase that I heard years ago. Turn your bad days into good data. So when you have a struggle, when when you behave in a way that maybe is inconsistent with your values, instead of beating yourself up about that, look at that and say, why did that happen? What's the data that I can collect from that I can learn from for next time?
Mm-hmm.
So turn your bad days into good data. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
And that's, when I hear you say that, to me, that's empowerment, that's power, that's our ability to take control of our own lives. So much of the time, we can feel like we're at the mercy of what's going on around us. And this gives us the ability to understand, reflect, and adjust.
And that goes back to that statement that Michelle used about becoming the CEO of your own life.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I have any good data, I feel I'm kind of out of control. And it's not that we don't have good data. A lot of times it's that we're not recognizing the forms of data that we're getting. Like we've just been talking about it, that our emotions are a form of data, that our mistakes are a form of data. And if we're being compassionate with ourselves, we're using those as learning opportunities, not opportunities to beat ourselves up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, a lot of times data, how we're responding physiologically, how what we're feeling internally, emotionally, psychologically, they can be indicators. Like uh, before there's an earthquake, there's the meters that go off. Whatever, there's health indicators, right?
Warning lights in your car. The
Warning lights
warning
in your
light comes
car.
on in your car.
Our dynamic bodies have indicators, right? which really brings me to a place where I feel compelled to share something that not a lot of people know about. We came to you all of our compassionators in episode 1, and we made the promise of being authentic and vulnerable. And in the spirit of that, I have a speech impediment, and I actually took 12 years of speech therapy to minimize the stutter that I have. Now, my mom and my husband will tell you that I actually stutter quite a bit at times. I don't try to not stutter around them. I feel safe. They're the people I feel safest with. And so I don't work to hide it or to use my tools. I can relax. It takes so much work for me to minimize my stutter. Now, here's the thing. How it's relevant to this discussion is that when stress is up, when I'm not sleeping well, when there's some discontent within me, my speech impediment increases and I have to work even harder. That is that warning light in my car. Amy, pay attention. You're not paying attention to yourself. You need to give yourself compassion. What is it that's missing? And so, it's been, and I don't think I realized this until probably the last 3 or 4 years. Amy, this is a warning. You need to pay attention when your speech impediment is showing up more. That's a warning sign.
Yeah. And I love that description. I hadn't even thought about this until just as you were describing that. But I had an experience that demonstrates that during that COVID year of 2020. My work went from fully on the road teaching, training, speaking to completely virtual overnight. And I lost about $60,000 worth of business off my books in about 2 weeks of events that were canceled and that I didn't have replacement for. Now, I fortunately had savings that built up, but I spent so much time in my little office here where I'd used to being on the road and traveling a lot. We got to about October of that year, and I was feeling myself imploding. I could just feel myself I was not the best version of myself. And I was putting on the good face and I was delivering what I needed to, but I realized I had to get away, and I had to get away more than just taking my walks around the neighborhood for exercise. So I went to my wife and I said, "Are you okay if I disappear for a day over the weekend?" And she's like, what do you mean disappear? I said, "I just want to get in the car and just want to drive someplace." And she said, "Well, I'll come with you." And I said, "No, I need to do this alone. I just need to get out and away." And we didn't have the money for me to take on my own staycation or vacation someplace. So I just got in the car and I drove up through the mountains here in Utah where I live. And I just spent a whole day stopping at little lakes and walking around them and taking pictures and enjoying the time. And it was such a difference maker for me when I got home at the end of that day to say, I'm okay now. I just needed to get away from that one little office environment that I've been seeing every single day when I'd been used to having a lot of variety in my life. But it took me a long time to get that warning sign. And I thought if I'd caught that earlier, it wouldn't have gotten as bad. And so and doubling down on your point about watch out for those warning lights, understand what those warning lights are in your life and what you need to do to get that warning light switched off.
And in your story, there's a couple of key moments for me. One is you became aware that you weren't showing up as your best. Hey, and the fact that you didn't ignore that, I think is absolutely key, because sometimes we can push, we can ignore, we can say everything's going to be all right. I'll be better tomorrow, but not actually look at. So the data is telling you this. What are you going to do with the data? Number one. Number two, you went to your wife and you said, this is what I need. This is what I need. That communication to say, I need help, I need different, I need to step away, whatever it is. And so much of the time, I hear stories, and I felt this way, of shame for feeling that whatever it is, I can't get through it, or they're not able to get through it. And couldn't be farther from the truth. And I love that in your story, I didn't hear anything about a struggle from your wife. It's not about her. It's about you. It's about you and whether they're our kids, our life partners, our friends, whoever it is, they can be supportive, but we have to heal ourselves.
Yeah, and I should add that I did go through a fair amount of shame in terms of, why I shouldn't feel like this. Things are actually pretty good in my life. Why am I feeling like this? It took me a long time to figure out what that data meant, what that warning sign actually meant to me. Yeah. And I love the point that you made. I didn't emphasize it as much in the story, but I did have to clarify for my wife, this is not about you. There is nothing you're doing wrong. Mm-hmm. This is about what I need in this moment. And she didn't fully understand it, but she got it, and she accepted it enough that she was okay with me taking that day away.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to just give an analogy of what we've talked about with this piece of, possibly shaming ourselves for needing something. And when you were talking, I actually pictured a flower drooping in really dry soil, surrounded by weeds, and then imagine, would that flower say, it's my fault that I'm not strong and brilliant and bright for everybody to see? That flower would not say that. That flower would not feel that. That flower would be begging for water and for somebody to pull these weeds so that this sustenance and nutrients can go to the flower. Those are the lives. That's what we need to do to create the lives that we want.
Yeah. And I can't remember the source of this quote, but I thought it was great. It says, we lie loudest when we lie to ourselves. And we sometimes do that in those situations and say, I just need to be stronger. And we ignore the data, or we don't see the data for what it actually is. Mm-hmm. Another point that came out that's related to this, that came up in the conversation with Michelle, because I asked the question about, when does self-compassion go over to self-indulgence? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, yeah, everybody just needs to give me what I need to give because I need my self-compassion. And that goes over to self-indulgence. And what I heard and learned from Michelle was that self-indulgence is really just the opposite side of the same coin as self-flagellation or self-criticism. That we're making excuses really for how we're feeling or how we're behaving in that moment. That self-indulgence or self-compassion becomes self-indulgence when we use it as an excuse for not showing up as our best selves. And so we need to get away from both of those extremes and stay in that sweet spot in the middle of self-compassion, which also leads to compassion for others.
Yeah, and I'm going to add on to that because, in addition, I heard her talk about it's important for us to give ourselves what we need and to not feel guilty, to not beat ourselves up. But when we are making excuses, so what she used, the car accident, right? X person has been in 3 car accidents and their partner is a little frustrated about it. To just let this continue, it is really not being a responsible partner, but to turn around and say, I'm a little concerned. You've gotten into 3 car accidents. Is everything okay? Are you paying attention on the road? What's going on? There's an accountability piece there, right? To let that slide, let's not act like that's self-compassion. That's an absence of accountability, right? And so there's a really clear line there of, and I looked at it as, are we making excuses? She didn't say this. These are my words. Are we making excuses for how we're showing up and giving ourselves a pass to slide by? That's not what self-compassion is, right? Yeah. Self-compassion is saying, I'm not, like you said, I'm not showing up as my best self. Let's take a self-assessment here, and let's see what needs to be adjusted.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the hard answer. It took me a while to figure out, what do I need in that moment to make that shift? And in a way, I was guessing. And sometimes we have to do that, to try a couple of things and see what's going to help you get back to your better version of yourself. As you were talking about the car accident analogy, sometimes I think that we believe it's compassionate to other people to give them a pass in those situations too. Like you said, well, it's okay, it doesn't matter. It's just, but then that still is eating at us. Sometimes we need to help each other see, what is our data showing? You've had these 3 accidents. There must be something going on. That's data that says there's something going on with you. That's a compassionate conversation that you can have with those that you care about, to help them see what those barriers are, or what is happening in their lives that's leading to these data points.
And I think that our approach, this is another thing that Michelle talked about, our impact, how we're showing up. She specifically spoke about the leader who felt like they weren't being heard. And so what this leader did is they started to raise their voice. And in a result of raising their voice, speaking louder, it was actually disruptive in not a good way in the environments that this person worked in. And so Michelle was able to, provide some executive coaching and help this person get on track. And I can't remember what happened in their career, but it was pretty transformational. But when we think about our impact, that to me was a really big piece of it, is understanding that sometimes there are things that are going on inside of us that are leading us to react, respond in a way that we go, I'm not really pleased with how I showed up the other day. Okay, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And where is this coming from? Because I think you need to know where it's coming from to know what you're going to do about it.
That's right.
And that, I thought, was one of the great insights that we got from Michelle. And by the way, again, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it and get that story that Amy was talking about that leader, because Michelle gives the actual results. And if you can't remember it, go back and listen to the episode again. Even if you've listened to it before, you will gain much more each time you listen to that episode.
Yeah. And I feel like all those key points that I wanted us to cover with you all here today, because just a little insight to how Mark and I work, right, is our promise to you is that when we bring a guest on our podcasts, the reality is, inside, we're going to want to share a whole lot of stuff because we're going to be so excited. But we also know that this guest has so much to share, and we want to give that to you. We want to give them that platform to share all their goodness, all their wisdom, all their expertise. And so what we do is we then talk about it like we did here today. Okay. And so this is our first time doing it. So you got to see us kind of, hey, how are we feeling about this? You and I, as usual, Mark, we're right in sync. And so in the show notes, you're going to be able to see all of Michelle's contact information. In episode 2, you'll see it there as well. Definitely reach out to her. I said in episode 2, I'm going to hire her as a coach. because I want to be able to unlock that door and walk through it. I know there's still some areas for me to improve and grow. And if you're feeling that as well, I'm going to encourage you to act on that. At least reach out to her, say, hey, Michelle, let's talk about it. Mark, I just love it's episode 3, but I mean, this is amazing, right? I love this.
And I'll tell you, compassionators that are listening in, the hardest time that Amy and I have is halting the conversation, because we have so much we want to go through and so many other topics, but we want to keep it in a reasonable, absorbable time frame. So take some of the tips, whatever jumped out to you. You're going to, as you listen to these podcasts, you're going to have thoughts that say, ooh, that means I should follow that little nudge that your brain is giving yourself, that will help you to infuse compassion into your life and to the lives of others. So compassionators, join us next time. We're going to have another fabulous guest that we're in the process of lining up right now. And join us on the next episode of Infuse Compassion. In the meantime, have a compassionate week. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.